Well, the then opposition Labor Party had been very critical of the Morrison government when Morrison announced this decision, and they'd promised to reverse it, and that's what they've now done. So that's the domestic politics of it. It was criticised by Labor at the time as a cynical, manipulative ploy simply to try and rack up a few Jewish votes in the by-election for the seat of Wentworth, given that it happened just a few weeks before that by-election was due, and therefore the Labor Party said they would reverse it. And the only significant country, the only other developed country that had done that was the US under Donald Trump. So it did look very much like Scott Morrison wanting to do a mini Trump foray in the pursuit of domestic politics. And in the international politics of it, it returns Australia to the mainstream. There are something like 90 countries that have embassies in Israel. Of those, only 4 have their embassies in Jerusalem. The rest are all, as Australia's is, in Tel Aviv. So it really just returns Australia to the status quo ante and to the international mainstream.
Interesting. Well, look, the Chinese Communist Party, as I mentioned, Congress is underway. She is expected to be endorsed for a rule-breaking, really, 3rd term. Try and give us a sense of what is driving him to overthrow these very carefully laid parameters.
Yes, they were very carefully laid. They were carefully laid by Deng Xiaoping, the party strongman and leader and supreme leader in the 80s, because the absence of those restraints had allowed the creation of Mao Zedong as this uncontrollable, unchecked ruler for life who launched China into these convulsive episodes of enormous upheaval and mass death. The Great Leap Forward probably killed somewhere between 30 to 40 million people, making Mao one of the greatest mass murderers in history, and the Cultural Revolution killed millions more. So Deng Xiaoping was very determined that not be repeated, the sort of personalisation of power in China. So he created 2 things. He created collective leadership rather than one strong man dominating everything. And second, he created these term limits that no president or no general secretary should serve more than 2 5-year terms. So Xi Jinping has now broken through both of those. He's cast aside collective leadership. He's broken, as you said, the term limit rule, changing the constitution of the country to do so. So why would you go to all that trouble to get another 5-year term? Why would you break those systems that have tried to disperse power, provide checks and stabilise the country? Well, the overwhelming reason, there's the reason he gives, and then there's the reason that I think most analysts impute to him. The reason he gives is that this is such a critical period, an essential and vital period in China's history, and it really needs him to see through the projects that he started, and the overwhelming one, the overriding one, being what he calls the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. But what independent analysts everywhere generally see this is a man who has made so many enemies, alienated so many powerful people. So this is self-preservation, this is self-survival driving this man to stay in power, probably for as long as he lives.
It's one thing to eliminate any checks and balances on your power, but this is also happening in terms of the policy direction that he is taking China. He clearly had no time for this blatant capitalism, but it's very damaging to the economy and the growth that China has in terms of bringing people out of poverty.
Yes, Xi Jinping has pursued this suite of policies which are all weighing heavily on China's economic growth. So the first of those is the what he calls dynamic zero COVID policy. In other words, rolling lockdowns wherever there's an outbreak of a case, even now. And that has really frustrated a lot of Chinese citizens, as well as continues to impair a lot of economic activity, as we know from our own experience. But it just goes on and on in China, and this week Xi Jinping's regime has let it be known that they have no intention of relaxing that regime, that system. Also, as you say, his suspicion of the private sector, he's rolled back private sector scope and freedom to operate, and he's really pushing forward with state-owned enterprises leading development. Well, China has proved in the past that that's just a recipe for low growth and stagnation. This year, the IMF is forecasting that China's rate of growth, economic growth, will be lower than Australia's. Australia's projected, according to the IMF, to grow at 3.8% this year, and China at 3.2%, which is less than half China's announced growth target. And the third and final big weight on China's growth performance is Xi Jinping's policy of cracking down on the big Chinese tech companies because they were gaining too much power, and he saw them as some sort of challenge or rival to his own power. So because there is no self-correcting mechanism and no checks on his power in this system, he can pursue these policies, which really are economically quite destructive to China.
What he is also trying to normalise, Peter, is the fact that China needs to be on a war footing.
Yes, he's trying to normalise that, and that's the exact word he used, normalise war, and he's trying to emphasise it as well. He used the phrase normalising war in his work report this week in the sense of both defensive, normal, routine activities like military exercises, but also to fight and win regional wars, was the quote from Xi Jinping. And together with the military build-up and the capability build-up, there's plenty of rhetoric from him, from Xi Jinping, about the importance of concentrating all efforts on military preparedness and being prepared to wage war. So there's a lot of that rhetoric. And in his work report, he used the word security or safety, I think it was 89 times in a 2-hour speech, whereas references to the economy were much rarer than they've been in any comparable modern work report. And so that's the emphasis part. He wants to emphasise security and warfare and international confrontation and international struggle is one of his favourite phrases. Because they don't have much to boast about on the economy at the moment. So seeking to move away from that story and to talk about something where he can boast, where he can reinforce his claim to legitimacy to rule China. If he can't deliver on the economy so much, he's determined to deliver on internal security and international military dominance. And that's what he's talking about.
Interesting times. Good to talk. Thanks so much.
Pleasure, Bev.